All right, Leo. So from Halloween, you pulled Apple, Risk and Reward, and then from Hidden Realms, the Ringmaster of Scrutiny. And this did come up as a challenge, but I think it's a good thing considering you're looking at risk. So now with Apple, you know, right, every once in a while we have to take a risk if we're wanting things to change. But then the question becomes, are you wanting to see change but not willing to do anything to make that happen? But because of the Ringmaster of Scrutiny coming up as a challenge, you may have to look at something a little bit more carefully before you take a risk here. So it coming up as a challenger is saying that this is a warning to read the fine print and watch for hidden agendas when you're involved with other people. And that's what sticks out to me. All right, Leo, here we go. Here's your overall for the week. The Queen of Swords, oh boy. Okay, so now if we're talking about you with the Queen of Swords, then some of you may be, I think you're keeping a watchful eye on somebody because I see her like open, like, okay, I'll go with you, but I'm going to stab your ass if you try to do something shitty, Now, for some of you, it could just be that you're being very blunt and direct about, what you expect to see from a person. You may be dealing with an air sign here, but it's because of their presence. I feel like there's a part of you that's a little bit reserved almost. Now, in the past, the King of Pentacles, okay, so, you have earth and air going on, but again, right, like the personalities. But I do think that this is going to be, the person that may be coming through that there's a little bit of hesitancy on, especially, again, when you're talking about taking a risk with somebody and needing to pay attention to, the intentions. And that, I'm telling you, is the theme for this week. Oh boy. Now with the King of Pentacles, right, Earth, but we could also be talking about, a business relationship here because it is the King of Pentacles. But then the other thing that I warn is because of the Queen of Swords being the overall is, are you dealing with a person who is looking at what they can gain by being involved with you? Or are they just overly materialistic, right? But, we'll see. He doesn't have to be a bad person. Everything always hinges on what's happening here, it seems to be. Oh boy. All right. And that may be, where the reservation is coming from with the Hangman, right? There's still a part of you that is bound to this, and I always say that when I see the Hangman, and especially with this one because you see it. But, are you still like in that state of limbo because of them? Are you waiting to, get some enlightenment on what their intentions are, right? But not willing to like let go. But then at the same time, I don't want to say that you're completely pushing this person out. I think that you're watching them carefully, but then at the same time, you're allowing them to put you in this spot where it's like, well, what the hell? What's going to happen here? What's going on? The Ten of Wands and future conditions. Now, obviously here with the Ten of Wands, you're talking about oppression, right? Feeling weighed down, being overwhelmed, being overburdened, all that wonderful shit with the Ten of Wands, right? But you are talking about releasing all of that. Now, is it you, releasing yourself of the burden of this person? Or, are they looking to drop a bunch of stuff onto you? And is that why you're kind of like, I don't know. You come with a lot of baggage. That may be an issue. That or you're just dealing with somebody, especially in terms of work, who is piling a bunch of crap on you. But, you're not really making a change, though, with the Hangman being in the present moment. Are you waiting for them to change before you finally get up the nerve to like cut them out of your life, so to speak, with the Queen of Swords, or what? Your best path to follow, the Eight of Pentacles. And again, right, we could definitely be talking about a person that you're dealing with in a work situation, but with the Eight of Pentacles, the question becomes, as far as advice, is how much hard work are you having to put in here? And then I look at the Ten of Wands and I think of you busting your ass and doing way too much. way too much. And then I look at that and I think, first of all, the Eight of Pentacles, you're talking about somebody who clearly knows what they're doing. Okay. Now, generally, this is going to be, someone who enjoys what they're doing, but I don't see a lot of enjoyment happening here. I think of, I have to continue doing this work. I don't have a choice, but it's weighing on you, And I feel like the focus needs to be on where you need to put your effort in. Do you continue to do it for somebody who just keeps piling more on you, or are you going to actually start focusing on what you want to work on, But I almost feel like obligation. You're obligated to do this. Ooh, in your environment, judgment. Damn. With the Hangman? Whew. Yeah, you're being asked to review things here. And then not only that, but right, you want to talk about true calling and then looking at the Eight of Pentacles. But the thing is are you finding clarity because of the Hangman still being there? Are you assessing things in an accurate way? But there's no confusion there, but you're being forced to kind of look at things and review them. Now, are you dealing with somebody who is passing judgment on you? Possibly. Are you waiting for, somebody to make their own assessment of you? But I look at judgment and I think it needs to be like cleared away, the way that you see the situation, especially if you feel like you're in a state of limbo, waiting for change to happen, but then not willing to take any risks, because of Apple. But right, again, you're being asked to like really look at things in detail. And with the Queen of Swords being the overall, I mean, that's a good thing, but I don't like that some of you are hanging in there for somebody who I feel like doesn't deserve it, just because of her being the overall, and then looking at the Ten of Wands and future conditions, and then looking at this, But right, like it definitely, there needs to be a more accurate assessment of, everything that's taking place here directly involving somebody. Your hopes and your fears, the Two of Swords. You see it and you know it, you understand it, but making the choice to change is not that easy. I don't think it's because you're clinging. I don't think that that's it. I think that, making the choice to change things may be more effort than it's worth. But clearly you see, though, now with the Two of Swords, as far as hopes and fears, I mean, the hope would be to stop doing this now and make the clear choice. But, with the Hangman being there, it's like, no, you can't yet, but you're being asked to review things and look at them in a different way instead of waiting on somebody to pass judgment on you, is what I feel like here. Oh, and then the outcome, the Lovers. Boy. All right. So definitely it could be about, the major choices that you're going to make as far as work goes. It may be work partnerships, which is possible, but we're not talking about the Two of Cups here. We're looking at the Lovers. So it could be, major choices here that are difficult to make when it comes to love situations. But are you seeing things accurately? And then I look at the Queen of Swords as the overall, and then I question how happy are you? How much are you actually willing to put up with? And it doesn't mean that this person is a bad person, but for some reason, they've got you in this state where you're like, come on now, right? But yet you're the one that's having difficulty, making the choice to change, to stop doing this to yourself. And then the Wheel of Fortune. So yeah, there definitely is an opportunity here for change and for there to be better change at that, especially if we're talking about major relationships here. Now, at one point, and again, I go back to the Queen of Swords, this is you acting in a very direct way, communicating very directly, right? Being straightforward and honest, but it may have caused conflict. And there's like this waiting period for things to kind of clear up is what it seems like. But then you get to this place where you're like overwhelmed, But with the Wheel of Fortune, definitely it is an opportunity for things to change, but how is that change going to happen? And it's all based on how you feel about the effort that you're putting through, and maybe the attention needs to be on putting forth effort into making things better instead of seeing things constantly repeat themselves over and over again. Because clearly with the Five of Wands, there's, that conflict that's happening, but it's over the way one person is thinking about things, looking at the Knight of Swords. And that could definitely be, your King of Pentacles here, or, again, either air or earth. And you have this, somebody being very direct, being maybe a little bit too harsh, and then it creating conflict. But, again, I go back to the Wheel of Fortune, and yeah, I mean, definitely with the Lovers, there's an opportunity for things to be better, But what does that entail, though? Because, again, there's risk and reward. Now, it could be with the Two of Swords that this could definitely be, a situation that you thought about being done with, because we've got tens going on, right? But I don't think it's that easy for you, and is there, any reward to actually ending the situation, and I don't think that there will be. I just think that it's more so a conflict of communication, whether we're talking about somebody you're working with here, or if we're talking about, a major relationship with the Lovers coming out. But either way, there's a choice that's going to have to be made here. Do you continue the same cycle again? Or do you make change, And then I look at the Queen of Swords and I think, for some of you, it's like you've gained some wisdom and some understanding, especially when it comes to communication. But then I still look at her and I think there's something that's still like off-putting about the person that you're dealing with. There's still hesitation, So, and again, I go back to this feeling of there is some wisdom that's been gained based on, the way that you've acted and communicated before, or how this person has treated you before, which is possible. But wisdom is leading you to a place where, there's a possibility here to create more love, right? To be more loving, to create more of that in your life. It looks good to me. Like, I just think that, there may be circumstances surrounding possibly a relationship here, having to do with money and work, because of what I'm looking at here, that may be causing conflict. And then get to know each other. Learning to meet another's need for love is important for a relationship to grow. So apparently there needs to be more time spent knowing each other. That way, the communication of love here isn't so strained. It's not a bad reading to me. It's not, I mean, and again, right, like this could go both ways, relationship or work, but you're still looking at, needing to be a little bit more clear about what you're willing to risk here in order to get to a place where things start to change. But the whole point of this here is to use your wisdom to create more love for what you're working toward, but then also more love for the person that you may be dealing with. All right, Leo, so I do think looking at this for some of you, it may be hard for you to let go and just kind of clear things up, looking at all of these. But then I also feel like for some of you, you may be in this like waiting period here for somebody else to like, get their head out of their ass. You know what I'm saying? Because I look at you, right, whether you're dealing with an air sign or earth sign, with the Queen of Swords being the overall, I want to say Queen of Pentacles, and I'm looking at the King. I think that there is definitely a good connection here, possibly with a person in terms of a relationship. Now, for some of you, if you're dealing with a work relationship here, they may be dropping a lot on you. But, I look at her as the overall, and I think definitely there is some wisdom gained here through communication issues, absolutely, but there's still like a part of you that is like ready to kick some ass if need be. Now, I still look at this as you needing to make the choice here, though, to kind of just, it is what it is, make amends, right? Looking at judgment. But then I also think that you may be waiting on somebody to pass judgment on you, which isn't fair. Now, looking at the Ten of Wands and then looking at the Lovers, this to me looks like a very overwhelming connection, especially in terms of long-term important romantic relationships. But then also looking at, possible choices in terms of business relationships though too. But it's with the Ten of Wands, it's like, we need to release all of these heavy burdens in order to get to a place where things start to change. And like I said, there's like wisdom gained here where there may have been like some really direct, harsh communication here, but then you move into a place where all it's doing is creating conflict, pettiness, continuously arguing. But then you move into the Wheel of Fortune where I feel like, there's definitely an opportunity for things to be better and to start changing. I do think that some of you, need to read between the lines as far as what the risks are. Now, I think that goes for those of you who thought about actually ending this completely. Because I look at the Two of Swords again and I think this isn't that easy. I mean, you see the situation, obviously, but I don't think that, the choice is that easy to make. Now, I also go back to the Eight of Pentacles and I think, this to me looks like somebody who has had enough of carrying the weight of everything. And that may be where the arguing and the disagreeing is coming through. But like I said, it's, you're having a hard time here between letting things go and moving on. Do you just let it go and do you see things, and just clear them up and it is what it is? Or do you continue to hang in there and wait for somebody else to get their head out of their ass? It bothers me a little bit. But coming out, the rest of this is just the circumstances that you're dealing with when it comes to the person that you're involved with. Whether, like I said, it's work or, a very significant relationship. But it still looks good coming out because I keep going back to this. And I look at possibly better things happening here. Now, and again, wisdom, love, and create, right? Your wisdom in this situation is going to bring out, the love here and an opportunity to create more of that, which is not a bad thing. I think that some of you, if we're talking about a relationship, it's a good relationship. There's just a lot of misunderstanding about who is carrying all the responsibilities. Now, as far as speak the language of love, again, the communication, right? And then the wisdom of how things may not have worked before, looking at the Knight of Swords and being too harsh and direct. But then you're needing to spend time getting to know the other person a little bit better, which is funny because I get the feeling that for some of you, if this is about a long-term relationship, you're being asked to kind of go back and meet this person's need for that love. And you're being asked to create that now. It's like you know them, but you don't. But this is an opportunity to know them in a much better way once you start speaking to them in a loving way. And that's as far as relationships. But it's not a bad reading. It's not. It's just that there's contention about who is, carrying the burden of responsibilities and work. And then you're being asked to look at, how happy you are though too. Because I look at this Eight of Pentacles and I'm telling you, this person to me does not have the face of a person who is happy doing all that shit, I still think that this is something that needs to be worked on. But I keep going back to that Wheel of Fortune coming out and looking at it with the Lovers, right? The opportunity is definitely there for better things to happen.